Giants TV. Today we have Chris Edmonds. He is the author of The Culture Engine. Great book if you're trying to fix your culture for 2015. This is the one you need on your first list, January. That's what you need to get. So we're delighted to have you, Chris. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Tal. Liz, glad to see you both.
All right. Liz, good afternoon to you. How's the weather where you are?
It is pouring rain, but it's not snow, so I'm not complaining.
Yeah.
Good, good. And Chris lives in Colorado, and you got what, about 1 inch or so?
Inch, so nothing much. We'll probably see some more before the Christmas day actually arrives. So the shovels stand by.
And if you don't know Chris, he's got some really wonderful pictures he's got on Facebook about his winter. So it's a beautiful sight, very nice. So glad to have you here. Have you been practicing some of your music lately?
You know, we did. We had a wonderful opportunity. The band doesn't play a whole lot of public events. We do a lot of corporate parties and corporate events. So we had a Christmas party a couple of weeks ago, but got a call from Toby Keith's. There's a number of Toby Keith's.
Oh, yeah.
Around the country, and they said, can you do Wednesday through Saturday last week? And none of us had an excuse for not doing it. So I threw it on Wednesday at 7 and scurried over, and so we did 4 nights in a row, which is great. We haven't done a lot of public things in a long time. So having folks dance and ask for stuff and get our gear into a scenario where we don't have to do our lights, we don't have to do our PA system. It was really nice.
That's great. That's pretty neat.
I haven't done 1 o'clock in the morning thing straight in a long time.
Well, I know time is of essence, and I really appreciate the timing. I know a lot of people are on holidays this week, and they're getting ready for a new year, but we want to give you guys, our audience, a treat for New Year, and that's 2015. So we're thinking about what a better way to start our new year in 2015 with focusing on culture, because that's really what's going to drive your business to success. So we want to start off with, as we talk about 2015, we want to introduce a concept, a word. You know, some people have their goals and their aspirations for the new year, what they're going to be focusing on. And I invited Chris to our show because I think there could not be a better guest to talk about culture. So the word of the year for 2015 is culture. And Chris, you've wrote a blog today that actually got published today about how culture matters, and some of the statistics you share from a recent employee engagement surveys are still kind of still the downturn still in several organizations, which keeps you going around the neighborhood and trying to give some people some coaching about that. So why do we have such low numbers in there? It doesn't look like it's coming up, at least maybe a little bit, but not as much. What do you think this is?
Well, it's interesting because I think what happens, we've had a global recession where we're slowly coming out of that. It's not just a U.S. focused. It's globally this economy is getting better, and there's some really interesting kinds of what we look at is kind of things that happen because the economy is now growing. Folks 5 years ago, 4 years ago, were not leaving jobs, despite the fact that maybe those jobs weren't very inspiring for them.
Right.
They didn't have relationships with their bosses, but they chose not to leave because they were concerned about the job market. Now we've seen quite a difference in the economy, that the gross national product is up, there's hiring is much better globally. So there's some opportunities, in other words, for those talented, skilled players to choose to leave. So how do you, as a leader, craft an environment that's safe, that's inspiring, that's productive, obviously, but it's a lot more fun for people to work in than if it's not very safe or inspiring. Again, some of those statistics that I referred to, a company called TinyHR, tinyhr.com, just released the 2014 engagement statistics. 500 organizations, over 200,000 responses, and Tal, you're exactly right that 64% of those employees didn't feel they had a strong corporate culture. 49% of those were not satisfied with their direct supervisor. Only 21% say they feel strongly valued in their current role. That's just ripe for having these people choose to go somewhere else. So the reality is, that our organizations are not getting better. We've had such great, wonderful, rich sources of great practices for improving employee engagement, and we're not doing it.
And I think part of the reasons, and it does happen in some organizations where culture has become the new buzzword for a new year. We'd like to improve our culture. We like to have cultural engagement, but you really do a very nice job in your book. For those of you who haven't seen it, The Culture Engine, you give a framework for leaders to let you talk about the constitutional organization, and you really give a framework even for managers who are saying, well, how can I measure that?
Yeah.
And so you're really giving the tools there. So talk to us a little bit about your framework of getting that culture, not just a buzzword, but really something substantial, right?
Absolutely so, and it's very interesting because leaders that I work with, and I get a chance to work with senior leaders of global organizations, of smaller local organizations, everything in between, none of those leaders have really ever had the experience of, number one, living through a culture change that worked, and number two, even fewer have led them. So what I realized, starting with the concepts of this book, working with my publisher, Wiley and Sons, was to realize that I needed to educate. I needed to teach leaders that, number one, there's a different way of looking at culture, and number two, you can actually make it measurable. So the core kind of model that I look at in the Culture Engine is that you need to make values and citizenship as tangible, observable, and measurable as performance goals. So the organizational constitution is that framework. And it's basically a set of agreements that absolutely reinforces the performance expectations the organization has. And by the way, that organization could be a whole company, it could be a team, or it could be a department, or it could be a region. It doesn't matter that you're not trying to change the whole organization. It could simply be that you're going to focus upon your own team. And there's a lot of traction that can happen. The organizational constitution certainly underscores strategies and goals, but it starts with clarity of purpose of the team. What's that team's reason for being? Why does it exist? Who does it serve? What's it trying to accomplish besides making money? Making money is not a bad thing, but it's inspiring for a whole bunch of team members. It may be inspiring for stakeholders and investors, but there's got to be more to work than making money for somebody. The second piece, and it's the bigger piece, is values and behaviors. It's getting values in observable, tangible, measurable terms, and it means that bosses, leaders, shouldn't be focusing exclusively on traction on performance goals. That's not a bad thing to do.
Right.
But it's not a good thing to do for 100% of your focus. You need to do
right.
50% of your focus on the performance expectations and meeting those commitments. But the other half needs to be, are we creating a work environment that's safe, that's fun, God forbid, that actually creates teamwork and interactive cooperation, because we get better results from that, as well as having people feel more valued, more connected to the world.
Right, that's great, and I know for Liz, we do. That's something that for Liz and I we share greatly. I mean, the word culture is not just a buzzword for us, and we want to lead our teams that way, that there is values. And Liz, talk to us about what comes to mind into this conversation as well, from your perspective as well.
Well, Chris and Tal, it's been my experience that many times, leaders look at culture as something they're going to kind of push down to their employees. And can you talk a little bit, Chris, about the role that the example the leader set plays in culture and in getting buy-in to this constitution?
Well, great question, and Liz, you're exactly right. One of the things that I find, and I get calls all the time from organizations that are interested in culture change, but they're mid-level leaders. They could be directors, they could be in HR, they could be in organization development and learning. But it basically means that those senior leaders have delegated authority and responsibility for culture. And leaders can't do that. Leaders are the only ones that can actually change policies, procedures, norms, and that's really how culture gets reinforced. But the modeling you described is critically important. And I did a chapter in the book on managing by announcements. And it's one of those interesting, I call it a virus, where leaders are convinced that all they have to do is tell people what to do. And they'll do it. Well, any parent will tell you teenagers don't do that, and sometimes even spouses, partners, etc., don't do that. So you've got to not only state where you want folks to go, but you have to create a structure that makes it easiest for them to go there, makes it harder for them to go off path, kind of the elephant path. You don't want to have that happen. But what you describe around modeling is incredibly important, Liz. And the way I go about establishing this framework is to basically say to senior leaders, none of this is going to get embraced if you don't model it, if you don't live it, if you don't become the first ones out of the gate saying, these are the values, these are the behaviors. And if you see me behaving in some way that you seem to believe is inconsistent with the behaviors we just agreed to, call me on it. Now, number one, that's a dangerous place for people to go because it opens doors. But the reality is, if you want to help people see how you want them to behave, number one, you have to start it, and then number two, you have to invite feedback. I tell leaders all the time, you'll never be able to run a yellow light in this town again. You'll never be able to cut in line in front of somebody at the grocery store because these behaviors now become life-guiding principles, not just exclusively in your workplace. So they laugh, but they really get it, and they realize that they need to be consistent at home, they need to be consistent at work, they need to be consistent in their communities, and it's interesting because what happens is the standard gets raised for everyone, but unless those leaders are credible, consistent role models of the behaviors you want, nobody else is going to sign up.
So I want to, this is a kind of a great segue to finishing up with this question here is, what makes a great culture? When you walk into, we're familiar with the Zappas and the Southwest Airlines, and just read a really great book about the Container Store. Some of those guys were familiar with that great culture. It took them a while to get that. But what does a great culture feels like, or when you take a look at one, what would that look like?
It's interesting. It typically surface, there can be a lot of very pretty veneer put on a culture. They can have the right posters. They can have the people saying the right things. But it takes me 6 to 8 interviews of key players throughout an organization to pose questions like, how well are you treated here? Are you valued for your contributions and your ideas? Are your leaders credible? Do they say X and do X? Or is there that kind of meanwhile say something, but then it doesn't, it falls apart. So what I really get to is, how does the organization operate? And it means I got to look past performance. I have to maybe even look past customer service and customer experiences, although that often is a pretty good indicator. Right. Basically checking to see if customers feel like they're treated respectfully, even if they're wrong. That
right.
kind of thing.
Right. No, you're right.
The idea is critical for them to basically tell me that I'm trusted here, I'm given authority here, my ideas are valued here. I would love my kids or my best friends to come work here. That takes a little bit. That's a little bit deeper. And again, the veneer can look great, and a lot of veneers don't look great. You can tell that there's tension as soon as you walk into a shop or onto an airplane or onto a ship or in a sales environment. Have you ever gone into a car dealership where you can really tell the competition is really the number one value? And people are basically vying for your attention. And if they win and somebody else loses, well, good for me. So it takes a little bit longer to dig beyond and to get a stronger feel, a confident feel for how they're operating day to day.
There used to be a word that is not as used anymore, but the word camaraderie. Is that part of a great culture?
It is, and it's very interesting because I'll often have leaders say, well, we've got a great performance management system. We've got a great incentive system. And I said, well, are you incentive team behavior and cooperation, or are you
Hmm.
incenting individual performance? And they stop and they go, all we've ever done is incented individual performance. I said, you have people fighting each other. Ooh, all the time, but that's good for competition. That's what you want. It is clear, and the research is wonderfully consistent. When people share information, performance is better, promises are better, they're kept better, and service is better. It's just amazing.
It's great. Well, I think we had a really great first session for us to, for our audience to really be thinking and focusing about 2015. The questions that Chris were just talking about, go through them, be honest with yourself as a leader, and this is great framework for all of us to work with, and not just think of a buzzword or just to feel good. You can really use those questions, I think, to improve your business and your leadership. So, Chris, thank you so much for this first segment, and we'll continue in just a bit.
Great.